Uh, my name's Tom Derry. What was else?
Spell the name.
Spelled Tomdery.
And your position.
Well, I guess I'm the producer of this, or
Yes,
executive producer.
Executive producer, with the jacket on.
Executive producer.
Or chairman, ex-chairman?
Former chairman. Former chairman of the Australia Cancer Research Foundation. Now, can I cross my legs?
Oh, that looks casual. That looks good.
Yeah?
Yeah, that looks you look comfortable.
Hi, Tom.
We ready?
Yeah, ready,
Let's go.
ready when you are.
Okay.
You wanna
Sorry,
try
actually,
that?
Tom, can I just get you to do that with your shirt? Just
Yeah. To straighten it, or?
Just a little bit. Okay. That's it.
No, I didn't get time to iron it properly.
Look, I noticed, but I think we're okay.
Yeah, see? You noticed.
That's that nice casual look from Country Road, I think.
Try Dior.
Hey, Loki.
That's right. That's New York again.
Yeah.
Um,
Hang on, let me just...
do you want me to start you, or do you want to start yourself?
No, I'll start myself. The importance of technology in really moving forward in cancer research really is the basis of why we set up the Australia Cancer Research Foundation. Some 40 years ago, when we did set it up, we asked scientists what their problems were, what their needs were. And these cancer scientists came back to us and said, look, we could get money for projects from government sources and other philanthropic sources, but there's very little money for infrastructure. And so we decided that we would raise money for top scientists doing the most amazing work in Australia at the time and providing them with the infrastructure they need to progress their research. For the first 20 years of our existence, we had a hand in building every cancer lab in the country. When we started, there was no such thing as a cancer lab. Cancer scientists at that time had to work in rabbit warrens of hospitals or universities, and they didn't have their own labs and the facilities that they required. So we had a hand in getting those developed. But once the bricks and mortar part of their needs were starting to be met, we realised that it's technology that they really need help in as they were moving forward and times progressed. So most of the grants we give are in the technology area because that's where it's most needed at this point.
Well, just describe again for me what cancer research was like when you first. How did you get involved?
Well, I was working for a brilliant entrepreneur and businessman called Sir Peter Abels, and he called me and said, "Look, I want you to join me for a meeting I'm having with Lady Sonia McMahon, who at the time was the wife of the Prime Minister, or wife of the former Prime Minister." And so I just showed up because he called a meeting, and just before the meeting he said, "Look," he said, "Lady McMahon's coming to see me, and she's going to ask me to do something. So I want you sitting right near me so you can hear it firsthand and maybe get on with it for me." And Lady McMahon arrived and explained that they had a charity to support the Sydney Hospital in Macquarie Street, but that hospital was now closing, and here they was a charity looking for a cause. And they said, "We want to do it in cancer, and that's all we know, but we want you to chair it, Sir Peter." And so anyhow, Sir Peter had to agree, and the meeting was over, and he turned to me and said, "I need this like a hole in the head." So, Tom, I really would appreciate your help. And so, with his guidance and philosophical direction, I got involved. Subsequently, later in my career, I'd moved on, but still stayed close to Sir Peter. He asked me to join the board, the early board. And sadly, he was struck down by cancer. And really, at his deathbed, the last time I saw him, he said, Tom, would you please make sure that this Australia Cancer Research Foundation keeps going and does a good job? So I had no choice but to get involved. And at that stage, they were really short on who could be chairman. So they gave me the opportunity. And off we went. We had a small dedicated board. We had a very small dedicated team, one person, and off we went. It took us 3 years to get our first grant in raising $1 million. Subsequent
So it took you 3 years to raise $1 million?
to raise $1 million to get the first grant, which went to the St Vincent's group that were associated with the University of New South Wales, and they got their building, and a dedicated building of cancer labs and research labs to start their research.
Who picked research as the aim? Something to do with cancer?
Well, I think after a lot of discussion, it was clear research was what was needed. And then we went through the whole philosophical discussions of, yes, it should be research, it should be cancer, it should be research, but it should go to the absolute top scientists.
Sorry. Oh, she was. I thought she was joking. She put the dishwasher on. Open it up.
We just button off for a second. I can do it back.
How are we doing, guys? How are we
We're
doing?
doing great. Sorry about the dishwasher.
Is that okay?
Steve, will you button off for a second? Oh, yes, of course.
Ask me the question.
Oh, it's just why research? Who came up with research? And
Sure. Well, there were a couple of fundamental philosophies that were worked out pretty early. One was clearly this was a foundation to help manage and fight cancer. It would be research to help scientists. And it would help, it was designed to help the top scientists in Australia at the time working on what their peer group regarded as the most impactful projects, and would give them big licks of money, not just small dribs and drabs, but really make sure that the amount of grant is significant. And that philosophy has sort of remained for the last 40 years. And our focus has been on doing just that.
Just hold that thought. Close, stand by.
so Andrew leaving, he doesn't stand there anymore.
And quiet, please. Rolling. Clear.
Sorry, we just finished that.
Yeah, our focus has been just doing that. Since our inception, we've had the opportunity to grant over $200 million to these top scientists.
Well, every time you turn around, there seems to be another cancer charity, and it's like, what separates them, or should they be separate, or what's the difference between the different cancers?
Yeah, I guess.
Because it's difficult for scientists to get money. We understand that, but we probably don't understand how difficult it is. But there seems to be a queue of different charities.
Yeah, look, cancer is it permeates our lives so intensely that it's quite understandable that when a relative or a close friend has been impacted by cancer, they want to do something about it. We all do. And we usually think about where that person was affected by cancer in their body and say, gee, we've got to find a solution to that. Our approach has always been the most efficient way to help manage this disease and make progress is A, give money to the top scientists, and B, understand that cancer is really about our human condition. And what we need to understand is what are the fundamental causes of cancer and how does it operate? And therefore, how can we manage it? Where it ends up is another set of issues, and very important pieces of research need to be done on breast cancer and all the various forms of cancer that exist. But our approach is the quickest way and the most efficient way of addressing the problem of cancer is give it to the scientists and understand the fundamental causes. Look at what the impact of science had on the COVID situation. I mean, within a matter of months, by understanding how it operates at a fundamental level, scientists were able to come up with a vaccine that essentially prevented the pandemic. Same thing applies to most pandemic situations. And certainly cancer is something in Australia and in other countries around the world is one of the biggest problems and fears we face.
It causes a lot of fear, doesn't it? But it's also been brought up that every cancer is different. There might be breast cancer, but no two cancers are the same. What have you learnt about cancer over the last 20 years, personally?
Personally, well, I'm in awe, really, because the thing I've learnt most is that cancer is an amazing, it's an errant cell. One cell that got very naughty and decided to take on a life of its own. To me, that's the most amazing fact that I've learnt in observing scientists in action.
Do you want to go deeper than that?
So the basic one errant cell can cause the dreadful condition we call cancer in our body. So if we can understand how that cell works and where it came from and where it's going and why it can disguise itself in front of the defense system in our bodies, we're making real progress. And that's the thing that I'm observing most, things like immunology, which are just uncovering the defenses and the way cells can escape getting caught by our natural defense systems.
It's on the run, isn't it? It's always on the run, looking over its shoulder.
And it desperately wants to live forever, like all our cells.
What do you find the most rewarding of what you do?
Seeing scientists being able to do things that they otherwise may not have been able to without our grant.
Makes a big difference. Excuse me. I mean, I do get staggered by the actual fundraising for any particular scientist. I mean, how they do live sort of hand to mouth, which I don't think is genuinely realised by the general public.
Yeah, indeed.
Can you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I remember having a conversation with Ian Fraser, perhaps our most eminent scientist in Australia, cancer scientist in Australia, and he described the condition that brilliant PhDs have when they're looking for employment in top science labs. Without grants, the fact that NHMRC only provides 1 in 10 grant on average for every application. There are many brilliant people who simply can't afford to operate without those grants. So you've got brilliant PhD, post-PhD scientists who are capable of perhaps of doing amazing things, but for one reason or another can't get a grant. They've got nowhere to go. It's very hard for them. So they end up working for management consulting firms or finance companies or things that are probably very satisfying financially, but don't provide the opportunity for these talented and well-trained people to use their skills.
So if you're saying 1 in 10 are finance, 10%.
Well, it's not a rule, but for every grant application, you know, in any group, roughly 10% will get approved historically.
So that sort of means 75% of scientists who decide to follow science can't afford to stay there and drift off.
Well, it makes it very difficult. It's a tough pathway, and those people that take that pathway are very courageous and confident and dedicated.
Yeah, I must say, I've marvelled at them too. It's just, there's something pure about it, isn't there?
Yeah, they certainly don't do it for the money.
Good. You're in the right spot there. But as you say, the purity of what they're doing and their belief and what they've achieved in 20 years. I mean, you've seen the changes in 20 years. Do you want to, what was it like when you started and what's it like now?
Well,
Do you
it's,
remember?
as I say, it was all bricks and mortar when we started. And now it's observing the most sophisticated equipment and facilities and infrastructure that enables them to do what took 1 man year can now be done in 1 man minute. And to me, that's just a really good metric to measure progress over the last 20, 30 years.
Well, it's also the history of mankind. I mean, you go from the dawn of research or medicine, you're talking 4,000, 8,000 years, whatever, even if you call it 2,000. And what's happened in the last 20 years is like just eclipsed everything that's come before. So it's a very exciting time to be alive.
It is.
But to understand cancer, I guess you have to understand your own body.
Yeah, I think that's the most really interesting area to observe. It's really studying how our bodies work, how we got to where we are, why we got to where we are, and what can influence all the elements that go to make us up, to ensure that that errant cell won't survive.
Anything else you want to say about the errant cells?
No?
No?
I like the idea of the errant cell. As you know, I wanted to call this the errant cell.
It's still mild. I think we've covered most of the things.
Yeah.
So, Steve, do you have any questions?
Do you know, I think in fact what's interesting, because in the movie we are going to talk about the history of research, what Stuart was just saying is like for the 6,000 years medical research has in fact been taking place, but in the last 20 years what has been achieved eclipses all that's gone before it. That point of view said it would be like that would be fantastic for us, I think.
Okay. So
what he said.
okay. I guess one of the another really interesting observation as far as I'm concerned over the last 30, 40 years watching cancer scientists at work is not only the logarithmic growth of technology and advances in cancer research, but it's absolutely jet-fueled exponential growth to put together in the last 30 or 40 years more than had been achieved in the last 4,000 or 5,000 years of medical research is quite remarkable. And every now and then is worth just stopping and thinking about that.
I love that. Can you do that again? Because you were a bit hesitant and I thought you could do it better.
Okay. I got to remember what I said.
No,
Okay.
it doesn't need to be exactly that. It's
Yeah.
in the history of mankind or what's happened
Yeah.
in your own experience.
One of the remarkable features of research over the last 30 or 40 years has been the dramatic improvement, exponential jet-fueled improvement in what has been achieved during that 30 or 40 year period compared to the history of medical research going back 4,000 or 5,000 years is just remarkable. And every now and then we should just stop and realise the rate at which our scientists are propelling us forward in helping to fight cancer.
That's brilliant.
Genius.
We are in the. There's never been a time like this for science, has there?
Well, I don't know. That's hard to measure.
The only equivalent would be the space program, I think.
Well,
the
there's-
speed with which we're discovering stuff.
Yeah, the speed, but the discoveries of the last 10,000 years, are remarkable. They took a long time to get there, but they were remarkable. We can now do it in 30 or 40 years, but I'd be very careful about not acknowledging the tremendous progress in medicine in the last 4,000 or 5,000 years when you consider the history of mankind on this planet. I mean, that 4,000 or 5,000 years is just a drop in the ocean. And yet, they'd made great progress. We can now do it in 30 or 40 years.
I think of my grandma. She went from no flight
Yeah.
within her lifetime to landing on the moon. And that's incredible. to think
Amazing.
of, isn't it?
Amazing.
It's just like, it's amazing. Just thought I'd throw that in.
And thankfully, there are people in the community who are prepared to donate. And that's what makes progress possible. And we need to acknowledge these generous people. And in our case, we don't have big philanthropists giving us money. In our case, it's the everyday person that may leave something, whatever they have left in their will, or may give us a $50 a month donation. It's this that makes the difference. And in many ways, that's one of the most satisfying things I've observed in being part of this foundation.
And that is the hard jacket. I mean, you're saying the 10%, 1 in 10. If you don't get it from the ACRF, where else do you go? There's not many
Well,
agencies
there's the NHMRC, which is, a government-funded program designed to assist science in Australia, and that's where the 10% comes from. The Australia Cancer Research Foundation probably gets 10 to 15 applications for grants every year, and 3 or 4 get picked.
Can I just ask a question there, Stuart?
Yeah, sure.
Tom, is philanthropy getting harder or easier? It seems to me in the last 10 or so years, we have so many more billionaires, many more than we ever used to. Is that having a reflection on the ease of raising money from these people?
Well, we've never relied on philanthropists per se, because our experience is most philanthropists that want to give lots and lots of money to a cause have experts advising them. They want their own form of gratification and legacy, and that's fantastic. And thank goodness we've got that. But we are about ensuring that whoever gives money knows it's going to the top scientists, because the peer group of those scientists decide where the money should go. So it's a guaranteed filter to ensure that philanthropists of any size that don't get the opportunity to get the sort of advice the very, very wealthy billionaires get, to put the money with ACRF.
Thank you, Andrew.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, anything else, Andrew, you want to ask?
No.
Look,
No.
I was just thinking, you've been with the Cancer Research Foundation since its inception, really. I mean, you must have had some great triumphs and some great disappointments. Do you care to talk about any of
Yeah,
that?
one point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're getting around it. So
No, that's fine. I like it coming from you. It's good. Ups and downs.
To be honest, I haven't had many downs. We run on the smell of an oily rag, and as a result, we have the most dedicated board members, the most dedicated staff, the most dedicated CEOs. We've only had 4 CEOs in our history, and they have been absolutely dedicated to this cause. So I haven't had many downs. I've been very privileged. I've had lots of highs in terms of being able to, we started off with, a grant of $1 million. Now the average annual grant is somewhere between $2 and $4 million. But we also have a major grant once every 3 years for $10 million. And I'm hopeful one day I can see that go to 20 million. And I'm sure the quality of the board we have now will get us to that point.
Does that do those grants, which is basically equipment, isn't it?
It's infrastructure.
Has that changed the landscape in Australia compared to what it was, and how does it compare with the rest of the world?
Well, it's had an enormous impact because it is so hard to get funds for infrastructure. It is possible to get funds for people through NHMRC, other philanthropists, and hospitals and universities. But it's very, very difficult to get money for infrastructure. And so that's where we put our money, because it's so hard for scientists to get that, and they need it.
I think it was Phil. As Phil said, somebody gave you $10 million. What would you do? I said, I'd buy 5 mass spectrometers.
Exactly.
And he got 6.
When Phil talked to us after we granted him this project, he said, without the announcement of that $10 million grant, we never would have dreamed of doing this project. And the fact that that grant was possible to get allowed us to dream. And the fact that we got the grant allowed us to bring that dream true.
Do you want to explain that project? Just a little bit?
Well, I'm not very good at it.
In general, it doesn't need to be.
Well,
does it?
no.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
We interview Phil.
Don't worry, you
he's
can
one-
see this back before it goes in. You cut it out. You tell us.
Yeah, Phil was one of the interviewees.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's brilliant at explaining.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
I'm going to give him a hug, actually. And he's so, again, passionate, dedicated. And
Yeah.
It's wonderful. And they said getting 5 was good, but we screwed him down and got 6. Any other memories like that? Because that was a breakthrough. I mean, at the end, just running that, he explains it as well. And what they're doing is remarkable. And building the bank, basically, of all the cells.
I think one of the most memorable grants, I mean, every one of them's been memorable, but one that will remain with me for a long time was the peer group, the Medical Research Advisory Committee we have, decided to recommend that we give, I think it was $1 million, to a young scientist in Brisbane who was actually swimming against the tide and was looking at viruses. And he needed a cancer lab. So the board agreed that we would grant him this $1 million, and I had the privilege of going up to Brisbane and officially handing the money over. And it was Professor Ian Fraser. And I'll never forget it. It was an empty building, and there was a floor on this building that was going to be his lab. And I remember thinking at the time, I wonder what's going to come out of this space. And of course, what did come out of that space was a cure for cervical cancer.
That's a home run. That's tough to top. I mean, at the end of the day, the cause and effect, you go, where's it going to go? Oh, we cured it. I think he said the wonderful thing is it's only 20%.
Yeah.
It's 20%. Jay, do you have any questions? Because he's editing. There might be a
What do
patch
you-
you can...
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
I guess maybe what you see is the future, in the next 10, 20 years or whatever. Obviously, there's things like big advances with AI and stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of some, the next big machine that does something very special type thing, is there?
Yeah, not really. I think the thing that the thing, when you asked Ricky if you were going to do your PhD again, what would it be in? And he said, look, firstly, the technical area, the medical area he'd been researching, but he said, secondly, at the same time, I would get to understand data analysis inside out. And to me,
Just try and keep your eyes on me. Sorry,
I'm sorry. So to me, the importance of things like real tools to help data analysis is, together with, of course, the tools I'm talking about are AI and quantum computing. I mean, these things are just going to make a massive difference. Just as a lot of the technology over the last 10 to 20 years allowed us to move from what took 1 man year to 1 man minute, it will now be 1 man millisecond.
And it's exciting. I mean, you can almost sense, and I know there's not going to be one king hit. There's not going to be one pill that cures cancer. So it appears anyway. But from even 10 years ago, which to me is yesterday,
Yeah.
it's amazing. Yeah, what was 5% survival rate, now 50, and going up.
Absolutely. There is great hope. And that's the most exciting thing I can look back on in the 30 years I was chair of this great foundation.
So I just have a question.
Okay, it's not the one where babies come from, is it?
I'm still to find out about all
Wait, what?
where babies come from. It's been a lot of fun actually sort of asking the questions though, Stuart, can I say?
Yeah.
That's not what I was going to ask though. What I was going to ask is, cancer,
That's me.
yeah,
God,
Sorry.
help me. Oh, it's my son.
Sorry,
It's quite important. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought you were.
No. And rolling and
One of the other philosophies that were fundamental when we set up the Australia Cancer Research Foundation was that as much as possible, we would encourage new ideas rather than build on conventional ideas. And that's been a fundamental approach we've taken as we set up and as we have continued. And with the help of our Medical Research Advisory Committee, who have ensured that it is of the highest academic standard, we've always encouraged new and fresh approaches to managing and understanding cancer.
Bye.
that answers that.
That answers that. I don't think I've got many more questions unless there's something you want to...
How do you find your medical advisory board?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's one of the decisions in setting up the Constitution the chairman makes, clearly with recommendations from former heads of that Medical Research Advisory Committee. And I think we've been blessed. The community is not competitive directly with each other. The community, the scientific community, operates as a community and understands the benefit of putting their own objectives aside and sitting on that peer review committee and giving their time to help us decide, who are the top projects we should be supporting for each grant application.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I actually met Sir Fred Hoyle years and years ago.
Right.
Of course, he's a very eminent scientist. And he told us horrible stories about how competitive academia was, because it was all very political,
Yeah.
and people were actually, using their own theories and defending them staunchly, because in fact it gave them, chairs at universities and kind of, all sorts of, financial kinds of things, long-term jobs, etc., etc. So how is it that the cancer researchers don't find that same thing? What's different? I mean, they're curing cancer, these people, of course.
Well, again, these funds are hard to get. Whoever you are as a scientist, money for infrastructure was recognised as very difficult and is recognised as very difficult to obtain. And therefore they said, we've got to work together to make sure that the opportunity for top scientists in Australia to get money for infrastructure is there. And it was originally, it was again Sir Peter Abels worked with, now I forget his name, Gustav, our first medical research advisor, was the head of WEHI in Melbourne. Sir Gustav, and his name will come to me. And he was so well recognised that he just attracted the top scientists to work together. And that ethic really came from that initial decision by Sir Peter.
So you don't have rock stars, you do have legends within it,
Oh, absolutely.
which do attract other people.
Yep.
It's like them, yeah. Now, you made me think earlier, if the ACRF gives money to something, it's money other people might join.
Yeah, we have what's called a multiplier effect. Because what happened when we started was, and I'll never forget the first grant that I talked about with St Vincent's in Sydney for $1 million. We sat with the scientists at St Vincent's and said, look, we're going to give you this $1 million, but we're going to say to the hospital you're working in that we won't give that to you unless they match it. So suddenly they had $2 million. And then this group went to the university they were working with and said, look, we've got $2 million here and we're not going to get it unless you match it. And they had $4 million. And then finally they went to the government and said, we've got $4 million here, but we ain't going to get it unless you match it. And they did. And they suddenly had $8 million and were able to build their facility. We call that the multiplier effect. And what's happened over the last 30, 40 years is the prestige associated with getting an Australia Cancer Research Foundation grant allows those scientists to go and get more funds. And the multiplier effect we've calculated is about 4 times as a minimum. So given that the Australia Cancer Research Foundation has granted $200 million of its own funds, it's probably about $1 billion in value that has gone to Australian scientists over that period for infrastructure.
It's a hell of a good way to wrap it up, I think. Anyone?
Yeah, look, absolutely amazing. Look, it is interesting, but it's the Australian Cancer Research Foundation. Because, all of these theories are interrelated to scientists who are working across the world, in the whole spectrum of cancer research. Does the Australian Cancer Research Foundation engage with any international bodies?
Not as a foundation. I mean, we stay in touch with the UK, Cancer Research Group, and we're obviously aware of what's happening. But it's the scientists themselves that build collaborations with other top scientists around the world.
So none of the money goes overseas either.
No, it goes to Australian scientists in Australia.
I'm happy, Tom, unless there's something you
No.
just want to bring up.
Did it come across all right? That's the main
Yeah,
thing.
no, you came great. Yeah.
It did. Yeah, I mean, initially as you were warming into it, in fact, it sounded a little bit general, but I think, in fact, you said it all again in a much more direct way.
Yeah, good. And never refer to as ACRF.
I've been most of the time.
Right, yeah.
I've gone back.
Talk about the Australia Cancer Research
I've made
Foundation.
them do it more than once. Go back and say
Yeah.
Australian
Oh,
Cancer
mate.
Research.
Does everyone know the ACRF? I was just like,
Yeah.
Got a couple of this too.
up there.
Yeah, I think, I'm happy.